Dr. Jen here. I want to go over the ear model with you. So there's actually two ear models and then a cochlear model. Here you have your 3D ear model. The outer ear has a unique shape that's going to allow it to funnel sound into the external auditory meatus. The external auditory meatus is also known as the external acoustic canal. Remember that canal and meatus are interchangeable terms, and auditory and acoustic are interchangeable terms. The outer ear is called the pinna. P-I-N tells you in Latin that it has an edge. So things like pine cone, pineapple, those things have edges to them. You also can see that if we flip it to its side, it will look like a funnel. And this is showing you that it can funnel the sound into the external auditory meatus from the pinna, which is also known as the auricle. Basically what happens is that your sound is going to go down the external auditory meatus. It's going to end up hitting the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is also known as the tympanium, or commonly referred to as the eardrum. In lab, we're not going to call it an eardrum though, because it's a layman term. We're going to stick with tympanium or tympanic membrane. So on this model, you have here the tympanic membrane with the tympanic ring, and then you have your malleus and your incus are the bones that are attaching there, all right? And so your tympanic membrane is actually this little structure there at number 10. So once sound hits the eardrum, it turns it into a vibration. And that vibration has to go through three bones. Those three bones in order are malleus, incus, stapes. The way I remember these is that malleus starts with an M, right? So you have malleus, malleus attaches to the membrane. So you have this malleus attaching to the membrane, this MM thing going on. You have incus. Incus is in the middle. So I think IN, in the middle, IN, incus is in the middle. And then it's going to staple itself to this snail-looking structure at the labyrinth. And so here you have that snail-looking structure, right? This is the cochlea. You have these semicircular canals, which are named after anatomical positioning. And then there is this bone here. You see it, kind of triangular shape. It looks like a staple. And so I think stapes or stapes staples itself to that oval window here, right there on the labyrinth. Now these structures are also on a purple model that we use in lab. And so you have this structure here, which is the one I just showed you. Right? And that purple model is also a right ear. So when you're studying one model, study it with the other model. And if you're studying them together, it'll make sense like why one thing might be called something close to it, but slightly different on one and on the other as well. And then you'll notice there's a couple of structures that aren't on both models. And so it's helpful just to study them together, and that way you can make note of those. So let's look at this thing now, right? Remember you have two of them, right? So this goes to purple model. This is your 3D ear model. What happens is that when the vibration goes into the oval window, it then is going to come through these little turns here. And I like to look at these turns and compare them on both models and then merge them with your cochlear model. So it's best, like you see these, they're blue and orange, and then there's a white turn. You're spotting those? All right, and that's your apex of the cochlea there. An apex just tells you that it comes to a point. Like you're gonna have an apex to your heart right there at the bottom of the ventricles. You have an apex to a cochlea too, right there. So let's look at those, but look at them actually on this model, right? Those turns. So now what I want you to look at are these turns. So these turns each have three ducts that make them up. So there's three channels inside there. And so those three channels, when I look at those, it kind of looks like a Mercedes symbol or maybe like a peace sign. Those three have names though. So you have your tympanic duct, your cochlear duct, and then your vestibular duct. Now, your There's other names for them. They're also known as scala vestibuli, scala media, and scala tympani. Scala media and the cochlear duct are the same thing. All right, so they're interchangeable terms there. That's media tells me it's the one in the middle. So looking at this one closer to the yellow there. But you probably want to know, okay, what are we even really looking at? This is the cochlea. This is the part of your inner ear that allows for hearing, right? This area here allows for equilibrium and balance. So there's actually fluid that flows through here. And when you shift your head, what happens is that this shifts. It sends a signal to the brain that lets your brain know how your head is positioned. And between that and your eyes and some other receptors, it helps you figure out positioning. Right? But that's also why whenever you spin around in circles over and over and over, the fluid in here still spins. And so you're kind of like drunk-like afterwards. That's why, right? So these all help out with equilibrium and balance. There's semicircular canals where they get bigger, is known as an ampulla. I like to think that these areas get bigger, and that's how I remember these are ampullus. You have a lateral one that's going to be closer to the lateral side of the ear. Remember, it's a right ear. You have a lateral one, you have a posterior one, and then this one's known as an anterior or superior one. On your 3D model, you have them as well. You have the lateral here at number 20. You have this one, which is your anterior superior, and the solid one in the back is your posterior. Here's how I remember a trick to these. The back one on this guy is solid, and I think you have to have a solid backbone. And so the solid one is on the back, posterior. Here, if you look, this says 21S, right? 21S reminds me that the S means it's superior, right? And so that's this location here. It's also known as the anterior. And then lateral, obviously, is lateral. So that's easy. You have your vestibular nerve and part of your facial nerve, right? You have your oval window here. You have the stapedius muscle is next to the stapes. So that's your stapedius muscle, right? And then if you have an oval window, that's what pushes in whenever the vibration comes in, and the round window bulges out. That's that one there. So it's a nice round one. Oval is where this bone attaches here. It makes kind of an oval shape. So then once sound gets into the cochlea through vibrations, right? It's turned into vibrations. There's a membrane in the cochlea that then vibrates. And so eventually that vibration has to turn into a nerve impulse. So what we'll do now is look at that. So remember, we're looking at this part right here, right? Remember that peace sign? Okay, do you see the peace sign again? All right, so this is one that you have a diagram of in your lab manual. And what you really want, though, is an actual image of him. So in Moodle, there should be an image of him. If your lab teacher has not posted that, like if you're not in my class, you might want to go to that supplemental site in Moodle and pull it. If you're in my class, there's definitely images of this. So just go into our extra images that I have. So when you're looking at this, right, you can see now we have the cochlear duct here, scala media, right? You have your vestibular duct and your tympanic duct. And now let's talk about what's going on here. So once inside the cochlea, this membrane here, right, known as your basilar membrane, the way I remember this one is that it's on the bottom of this organ of Corti. So all of this is my hearing organ. This is all the organ of Corti, or Corti, right? So this is all the organ of Corti. And then this is that bottom membrane. Now, if you think back to the skin layers, right? The very bottom layer was stratum basal, right? It's a basilar layer. So when I think of like basilar layers, I think they're basement layers, they're bottom layers. Here, you have the basilar membrane. So that's this membrane here, right? You have your vestibular membrane here. It makes sense because that's going to separate scala vestibuli, the vestibular duct, from scala media here, the middle duct, or the cochlear duct. You have your tectorial membrane here. You have inner and outer hair cells, inner hair cells and outer hair cells. And you have your tympanic duct here. What happens though is that this basilar membrane vibrates and it causes these hair cells to then detect that vibration. They turn it into a nerve impulse, and then that impulse is going to make its way through a highway to get to the thalamus. Remember, all sensory except for smell goes to the thalamus. Your thalamus is your gatekeeper. It's going to determine what type of sensory information is relevant, what needs to go on to the brain for processing. If it's not relevant, the thalamus starts weeding it out. So it's going to go to the cochlear nerve, because the cochlear nerve is part of cranial nerve number 8, which is vestibulocochlear. It's going to go to the cochlear nerve, and the cochlear nerve is going to take it on to the brain at the thalamus. When you are reviewing this model, you're going to see that number 28 is not identified. So that's one that you would have to put like a box around. So you would have to identify it as all of this space right here. So all of this stuff is your organ of Corti. Now, there are several numbers on here. You are responsible for the ones in bold. If you are not in my class, you need to check with your teacher and make sure that they're going with the same thing. But the ones I want my students to know are the ones in bold. All right, so I'm going to go over a few more things with you on this ear model. I have removed the labyrinth, the structure here, and I have removed the tympanic membrane with the ring around it. That includes the malleus and the incus. And so now we're just kind of looking at this inner working going on here. All right, so what we have with the ear, remember that the sound waves are going to come down, they're going to strike the tympanic membrane here, they're going to turn into that vibration, go through the malleus, the incus, the stapes, enter through the oval window, go into the cochlea, vibrate that basilar membrane. It generates impulses that then sends those nerve impulses to the cochlear nerve. The cochlear nerve sends it to the thalamus eventually sends it on to the lobes of the brain. Specifically, we're talking about the temporal lobe. This part here, though, is another structure I want to discuss. So here you have your Eustachian tube. One of the things that happens with children is that fluid can build up here, and this Eustachian, it sits horizontal versus vertical. And because it sits more horizontal, fluid builds up in the Eustachian tube, which then causes infections in this area because it's a nice warm dark area for bacteria to grow. So what doctors typically do is they go in and they put a tube in the ear. By putting a tube in the ear, that is basically they take the tympanic membrane and they slice it at the bottom and they put what looks like a bobbin in there. So kind of like where my thumb's at, like wrist pressing. They're going to put a bobbin in it. A bobbin looks kind of like the rim of a tire. And that's going to leave a hole in the tympanic membrane. So as fluid gets high here, it then can come out the external auditory meatus and it comes out of their ear. And that way it prevents ear infections. Now, this will eventually fall out. And typically when it falls out, it falls lateral. So it comes out the ear canal. Every now and then it falls medial and they have to go in and pull it out or whatever. But usually that's what happens. The other downfall is that a lot of times when this heals, it ends up leaving a weak spot in the eardrum. And so sometimes you have individuals who are more prone to ruptured eardrums. So the pressure from either being on an airplane or maybe diving or something like that causes their eardrums to rupture. So just things to think about. But when you hear about tubes in the ear, that's where that tube's going. Now, as they progress to about the age of 7, those ear infections decrease between the ages of 4 and 7 because at 7, the Eustachian tubes are pretty much in a similar angle as they would be as an adult. All right? So that's what's going on with the Eustachian tube. It helps drain the fluid back down to the sinus and throat region. Another thing you'll notice, though, is number 16. So that's this muscle right here. So this is your tensor tympani muscle. Your tensor tympani muscle is a long muscle. When you first hear a really loud noise, it's startling. But then your ears adjust to that loud noise. So like a gunshot, it's not going to have time to like overcome that. But if it's something prolonged, your ears can accommodate it. And they do so through tensor tympani. So it basically puts like a muffle on the eardrum. So that tympanic membrane is where it ends up muffling it. And it says, whoa, this is too loud for us. Calm it down. And so that's what's going on with tensor tympani. So just a couple other structures worth noting. You remember this structure here from back at the midterm exam. This is your styloid process. It would be more pointy, right? They've cut it off a little bit. This is your styloid process. That's that one that comes off the temporal bone here. You also have a couple other things, like this one here is your internal carotid artery, right? That's one of them that we looked at before with the holes in the head. And we said, hey, your carotid canal is here. This is what's going on with this. So now you get to see it again. So comparing and contrasting the oval window and the round window on these models. So on this one, you're gonna have that oval window here, and the round window is this dot here, right? It's actually a little blue depression that you have. You have oval and then round. And on this model, you have the oval window here, and then this dimple here is going to be your round window. They're very close together. All right, so the reason this one has a hole is because the tympanic membrane with the malleus, incus, and stapes of this model actually attach together. So you have the tympanic membrane here in pink. Malleus member attaches to the membrane. Incus is in the middle. Stapes looks like a staple. But there's this long prong, and this long prong actually is to insert it into the labyrinth and hold it in place, right? So it's going to hold it in place, and that's just to help secure the model together for the purple model. So that's what you have for the malleus, the incus, and the stapes on this model. So you may be wondering, okay, well, how big are these bones that we're talking about? They're the smallest bones that you have, all right? Let's look at this. So here are the bones that we were discussing. So you have malleus here, incus, stapes. You can see how small those are. They're little bitty ones. So malleus, incus, stapes. Stapes is the smallest one that you have. It's about 1/10 of an inch in size. And then if you want to look at the labyrinth is really a cool looking structure. So you have one in the right ear, one in the left ear. And that's what you're looking at. So you see, let me see if I can get it without a glare. All right, so can you see malleus, incus, and stapes? And then you see those semicircular canals. And this is also one from a right ear. So just review those models that you have. There are a few other structures that I didn't discuss, and so those you can just kind of see in different pictures and whatnot. But that should help you out with understanding how sound starts off somewhere, then goes into the ear, to the tympanic membrane, vibrates into the malleus, the incus, the stapes. It's then going to enter the oval window, generate some action potentials that happen within the cochlea, send those nerve impulses from the cochlea, the organ of Corti, to the cochlear nerve, onto the thalamus, and then eventually, if it's worthy, it's going to go to your brain. But there's lots of things that the thalamus weeds out. So there may be like an air conditioner running that you don't even pay attention to, or some other slight noise, like maybe there's a noise in the background that you're hearing and it's pretty constant, like a little, or something, or like the cat just now, and you might not have even heard it. And then once it's pointed out to you, you realize that it's happening. How interesting. All right. So that's basically how things work with the ears. So I hope that helps you with understanding the ear and hearing. If you need more help with any of the stuff for the final exam, remember to look at some of the other videos.